is still frozen?
I hope not.
I think
All right.
we have a
We are
frozen
here
member
live,
with
warts
Frozen
and all.
JoJo.
Frozen JoJo.
Having some technical difficulties.
Frozen JoJo sounds like one of those like crappy shock jocks from the 90s, like
Yeah.
nothing but rock with Frozen JoJo and
Frozen JoJo here on 98.9, playing you only the best of classic rock.
and it's like then it kicks into Imagine Dragons.
There, I'm not frozen anymore.
There we go. We were saying Frozen JoJo is your shock jock radio name.
Oh, I could hear you. I could hear you. All right. Please lead us in, Brody. Let's get into it.
All right. So if you couldn't tell by the title, everyone, we're getting deep into some occult, esoteric kind of shit tonight. Specifically, Nick Land in the CCRU. That CCRU culture, cybernetic culture in the 90s at Warwick University plant, who was a philosopher, like grad student.
Oh, you're cutting out.
Yeah, you're cutting out.
Let's see.
I'm gonna boot you real quick. Give me a second. Try it now.
This is a nightmare.
Is it better now?
No.
All right.
No, it's worse.
Here. Let me disconnect you. All right. We'll wait for Brody to come back. Anyway, we're going to discuss CCRU. Nick Land just got a little bit more popular. He was mentioned on Tucker Carlson. All right. Say it now, Brody. No. You might
no audio.
You might have to go with like the crappy mic or something.
Completely muted.
Yeah, this is the occult curse on you. You've cursed my stream.
Seems like whenever I'm involved, your stream just has tons of technical difficulties.
Well, it's worth it.
All right, how does it sound now, everybody?
That'll work. That'll work.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. Let's try that again. Go ahead and introduce
impossible. All right, the CCRU, the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, which started at Warwick University in the 90s under Sadie Plant, and eventually Nick Land joined, who's kind of the main focus of tonight. And there was also Mark Fisher, a prominent member who's went on to do some pretty significant work in kind of post-leftist thought. But specifically honing in on Nick Land, who is purported to do the vast majority of the writing for the CCRU. It was all just credited to the CCRU, but he did a good portion of the work. The CCRU in general was focused on everything from cyber goth culture to esoteric philosophy to the Cthulhu mythos and Lovecraft to lemurs and William S. Burroughs. So kind of a big tent in terms of its different outlooks on life, if we shall use that term. And Nick Land later went on to be the kind of founding father, along with Curtis Yarvin, of the neo-reactionary and dark enlightenment movements. And what's interesting about both the what's interesting about the kind of both sides of the Nick Land coin is they've, as Dan was kind of bringing up earlier, is they've kind of risen in prominence after kind of being very fringe ideas. The CCRU has found some influence in post-leftist kind of ideas of our modern contemporary culture, and on the right, and kind of, especially in kind of techno-libertarian, techno-fascist circles, a lot of the dark enlightenment, neo-reactionary stuff has also risen in prominence. So now is as good a time as ever to discuss this stuff. But first, before we kind of delve into some of the selected topics, I wanted to just kind of get your guys' thoughts on Nick Land and the CCRU from your readings.
Please go ahead, Dan.
Okay. Yeah, I found the CCRU stuff through Brody after we'd met and hung out a good bit. And it to me, what really struck me was the fantastical artistic vision of it. And I still haven't finished it because there's so much to go through. Like,
Oh yeah.
whatever political opinions Nick Land has at the moment, because it jumps back and forth it seems, every decade, is that it just is. It's an incredible artistic vision. It's theory fiction, it's fiction, it's esoteric, it's occultish, and it's almost every genre you could think of, all in 250 pages. And it kind of tells a coherent story. And what really astonished me was it was kind of what I always kind of wanted to do as an artistic project. And that's what got Brody and I talking about, as I was already working on something and already finished some stuff. And he's like, oh man, you should check this out. So from a surface level artistic point of view, I think it's brilliant. The philosophical and occult stuff, I would rather wait until we get into it. What initially struck me about Nick Land is that, yeah, kind of like, who said it up here? Here. Nick Land went from being awesome to cringe and horrible schizopath. Yeah, and I think he's kind of like a what's the word I'm looking for? He's kind of like an artistic an abstract painting. Whatever direction you come to look at him, like that can flip. You could think that he started as a schizo and now he's awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens with a lot of guys like that. Like Brody I've had that discussion before about philosophers in general, is that it's like they spend their whole lives trying to convince themselves of what they're writing.
So Nick Land has the most prominent brainworm in my head, which is that whenever I'm at work, I feel like a libido node in a complex machine of techno capital. When I'm sending out U-Hauls, I am just, aiding the transfer of matter in this greater machine that is just sucking my vril for its own purposes. And I think, a lot of the influence from Deleuze and Guattari about the concept of deterritorialization and reterritorialization. To reterritorialize, to territorialize in the first place is to project map meaning onto the physical matter which you see. This is the family, this is the job, this is culture. And Deleuze and Guattari talk about the process of deterritorialization, how the flow of matter and the drives of people break these territories up. The distinction that's happening right now on the internet I see most prominently is, the territory of normie versus subversive being broken up in this hodgepodge of hyperculture online. And I think where Nick Land makes the error is he jumps even farther than Deleuze and Guattari and says that capitalism is the ultimate deterritorializer. It's going to eventually, technology might be some degree endemic to the system it's created in, even if it's its own form of artificial intelligence. But eventually, Nick Land proposes that it's going to completely deterritorialize and make obsolete human concepts of existence and create its own map in which perhaps even human components aren't even necessary. And many people, the most prominent criticism I see of Nick Land, besides the scientific racism and all that stuff, is that he doesn't acknowledge how capitalism really is a reterritorializer, and that it enforces homogenous wage slavery and the predominance of America, Israel, and the West over the rest of the world.
Yeah.
But is that even stable? Those are just countries, in a grander scheme of a system that's been presumably working since the dawn of time. And
one criticism,
so maybe view is myopic.
One other criticism I've heard specifically of his more dark Enlightenment stuff, because it kind of flipped on his views on capitalism from the CCRU to his dark Enlightenment work, going to a essentially pro-techno-capital view in his later work. But one criticism that I've seen is that it all kind of works on the presupposition that capitalism is like the natural evolution of like social Darwinism, survival of the fittest. That's like the mechanics of capitalism.
Even Darwin disagreed with that.
Yeah, so that's another criticism. But since we kind of got our own little introductions out of the way on some of our feelings about him, I wanted to jump into some specific topics. Did you guys read The Ghost Lemurs of Madagascar by William S. Burroughs and then the Lemurian Time Wars from the CCRU? If not, I have way too many notes on them, and I will fill you in on what they are. But I think they're a really good place.
I didn't have time to read them.
No,
I didn't have time to read them.
I didn't get to finish them though. So
Oh,
please go
perfect.
ahead.
You're going to get secondhand Nick Land writing. It's going to make so much sense. So, Lemurian Time Wars, I think, it's kind of the foundational text in a lot of ways to understanding the CCRU. And what makes it really difficult is that it's all in response to a short story called The Ghost Lemurs of Madagascar by William S. Burroughs. Those unfamiliar with William S. Burroughs, he's one of my favorite authors. He's a huge influence on me. He wrote Naked Lunch, Queer. He developed the cut up method with Brian Geisen. A very experimental author. He gets lumped in with the beatniks and the kind of earliest of postmodern writers, even though, as we will see in this kind of section of the stream, he is kind of a beast all his own. But anyway, The Ghost Lemurs of Madagascar starts by referencing a book from the 1700s called A General History of the Most Notorious Pirates, which has a brief mention of this pirate named Captain Mission, who started his own colony called Libertatia on Madagascar. That's all we really know about him in terms of real-world historical fact. And then William S. Burroughs spins it into this whole story where Captain Mission is searching for the titular ghost lemur of Madagascar and goes on this wild adventure where he starts disrupting pre-recorded time. And it turns out that lemurs are also atemporal beings that exist outside of time and before humans. So if you don't know what that means, I'll try to explain it. So there's this quote that kind of explains the whole lemur thing. The lemur people are older than the Homo sapien, much older. They date back 60 million years to the time when Madagascar split off from the mainland of Africa. They might be called psychic amphibians. That is, visible only for short periods when they assume a solid form to breathe. But some of them can remain in the invisible state for years at a time. Their way of thinking and feeling is basically different from ours, not oriented toward time and sequence and causality. They find these concepts repugnant and difficult to understand. So, once again, the lemurs are atemporal beings. And there's also the custodians of pre-recorded time. And that is essentially all time is set on a path that it is supposed to follow. And this is all in accordance with the one God universe, but we'll get into that later. And as Captain Mission is messing with these atemporal lemurs, it is messing up pre-recorded times, and the the custodians of pre-recorded time don't like that. They need to fix that. And some of the
That reminds me of the time cleaners from World of Tomorrow.
Oh yeah. I wonder if Don Hertzfeldt is a big Burroughs fan. But let me pull up my notes again. So as it goes on, you see in Burroughs' writing, he makes this real distinction between the lemurs, which exist in this like a state of innocence, while humans are in the prison of time. And it's our human ways of living are incompatible with the peaceful lemurs. We live by war and slavery, while again the lemurs are innocent. And it's kind of making this whole point of temporality, the idea of humans existing in time and thus imposing time on all other things as this essential negative. And then as we move forward to the Lemurian Time War, it gets even more complicated. This is the CCRU article. And it is also very important because it lays out Hyperstition, which is a very, very important to the CCRU's beliefs, but I'll circle back to that. The essential story of the Lemurian Time Wars is that when Burroughs wrote The Ghost Lemurs of Madagascar, he was actually, let me find the quote that describes how this relationship works. it was a joint templex invocation that predates the split between creation and recording. And what that is trying to say is that Burroughs and Captain Mission kind of became one atemporally, and Burroughs wrote the Ghost Lemurs of Madagascar through Mission in like the 1700s. So it existed at that time, and at the time he wrote it in 1987. And all the while, the custodians, which work for the One God Universe, which I will now define for all of you lovely fellows, is the main control program of reality. The OGU, the One God Universe, it incorporates all competing stories into one meta-narrative. It contains all fiction. It contains all stories we tell ourselves. It's kind of what defines the consensus reality as defined by Burroughs. And if this is getting complicated or you have any questions, raise your hand or something, because there's a lot going on here.
Everything is just projecting meaning, territory onto matter, but the combination of all these meta-narratives, all these conflicting stories, which become realer than the matter itself, are contained within the One God Universe, if I'm understanding.
Exactly. Yes, that's a good way of putting it. It is essentially territorializing all these things. It is defining everything that we exist within, from time to the stories we tell ourselves to history. Everything is contained in the One God Universe. It is the consensus reality. And by disrupting time and having the Ghost Lemurs of Madagascar essentially being written at 2 points in time, but at the same time, through two different people, it disrupts time. And this goes into the ideas of hyperstition, where the only way to compete with the One God Universe's fictions is to create your own fictions that become reality. Now, I have some quotes on hyperstition that might enlighten it. The first, as a very basic definition, is fictions that make themselves real. Another quote I got that helps explain it is: fiction is not opposed to the real. Rather, reality is understood to be composed of fictions, consistent semiotic terrains that condition perceptual, affective, and behavioral responses. So it's the fictions that define our life, and how they're put out there in hyperstition terms. You put out a fiction, and essentially, if you get enough people to believe that fiction, it becomes the reality. And it's essentially you're using the rules of creating these meta narratives in these fictions against the main meta narrative of the One God Universe. And I think that's as good a time as any to kind of get your guys' thoughts on this. Especially Dan, you've been quiet, so I'm curious to hear what you think of the Lemurian Time Wars.
I mean, I'd like to understand more of it, of course, because there's a lot of contradictions in it. This idea of the One God Universe, it would have to either, is it one agent, like one idea that holds it all together, or are we active agents in it, which makes sense, but that means we are also part of it, which means we're always influencing it at all times, always. And so it seems like it's like partial Gnosticism, because you're kind of trapped in this unchanging thing but you can also participate in it.
Well, so I think because, again, it subsumes all other fictions, which is the complicated part, because it's saying it subsumes all other fictions created into this meta narrative. But at the same time, they claim that you can create your own fictions which compete with the meta narrative, which are.
But don't they just get subsumed into it, thus becoming reality?
Well, the way they explain it, and again, this is, I don't even fully, and we lost Dan. But I guess I'll ramble on this for a little bit. But they subsume, but it says since all fictions are subsumed by the OGU, the new fictions that we create to compete with that are kind of able to slip through the cracks because everything's fiction.
So we're fiction as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like, again, like there's the one master reality that subsumes all our realities, but we can create these new realities to fight that. Because especially with William S. Burroughs, he was essentially friend of the pod, Brad Kelly, his podcast, Art of Darkness, his former podcast. They described William S. Burroughs as liberalism with a gun, which I think is a really good way of describing it. He was like the ultimate emancipator. He wanted to be emancipated from flesh, from time, from language. And looking in that context where he saw all those previously mentioned things as mechanisms of control, essentially these creating new realities to compete with the consensus reality of the one God universe is an emancipatory act to break free from anything that could shackle you.
And that's almost like that connects to Buddhist ideas of becoming one through nirvana. You know, if you think of the one God consensus reality through a libidinal materialist lens, which is where kind of the base of Nick Land starts from the very beginning, then all of matter is just flowing impulses. You know, the death drive, you know, the pleasure drive, destruction and recreation, deterritorialization versus reterritorialization. And it's almost like the experience of qualia is the experience of projecting a competing reality, a competing fiction and interpretation onto the one true reality, which is the flow of matter.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it.
In that competing reality, we thus, you know, change and alter the one, you know, true reality, but that is just part of how it works.
Yeah. Dan, your thoughts?
Yeah, like again, to me it sounds almost hyper Gnostic, as in it's a prison that we ourselves hold together and can change, but maybe cannot actually transcend.
I think that's a good way of putting it, because it does operate off the principal kind of Gnostic idea of, instead of us existing in the demiurge's, you know, creation and trying to escape from that, it's a similar concept of trying to escape from reality itself, which again is very central to William S. Burroughs' kind of whole outlook on life. Down to some of his most interesting things to me are on language, which comes very heavily into play with Hyperstition, since it's, you know, language constructing fiction, which constructs reality. He once so eloquently put it as, language is a virus from outer space. And I think that sums it up pretty well. But the idea of language being another one of these trappings of our reality, because we think in internal monologues, you know, we think in language. We can't have just pure thought in the way that an animal does, you know, where it's just operating off of instinct. And language, as well as
it's an inefficiency in the flow of information, that's what Nick Land wants to emancipate. He doesn't want to seize the means of productions for human reasons. He wants to emancipate the means of production from human control. He wants to ascend all human values of morality, pain, and pleasure, which he thinks are just inefficient, you know, machinations of biological systems, which are not as efficient as, you know, greater machinic systems and greater feedback loops between humans and technology, you know, with the eventual goal of rendering the humans obsolete. That's what he fetishizes, so to speak.
Oh, yeah.
What's funny is I've thought about that concept before, working it in fiction, like taking it to its logical conclusion of what if words are gone and only intentions remain? Like, and people understood the intentions of each other. We like to think that would bring utopia, but I tend to think that it would make things way worse. Like, I don't think it's language that causes the problems between people. I think it's people that causes the problems between people. And now imagine that barrier is no longer there, and it's just pure intention, pure thought going back and forth. I mean, the reason I say that is because the printing press, you know, introduced its conflict. The internet and social media, where there's more exchange of ideas and more words going on and better way to clarify, has made things like even more screwy. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Well, and that kind of goes to the idea of language as a virus, in that it's, because he compares it to a virus, obviously, in that a virus, it spreads, it propagates, it becomes stronger as it does so, and language operates similarly. And with greater means and technologies of proliferating language, such as the printing press, and then, you know, mass media communication with television and radio in the 20th century, and now the internet and AI in the 21st century, it is greater use of language. So I do completely agree with you on, it's not just language which is the problem between humans, it's humans. You know, I think that's some of the stuff about language lacks a understanding, I think, of human nature. But at the same time, I do think that it's not just human against human as much as it is human against self, and the barriers that language imposes on even your understanding of yourself. You know, because you feel depressed, you have the word depressed to describe that, but it doesn't really tap into the greater emotional weight you're feeling at that time.
And Baki, I didn't mean to forget about you, man. So my only problem with libertarianism is only because it's atheistic. Well, and that's an interesting idea. And the reason I'm bringing that up now is because would you guys clarify if the occult / Landianism and this kind of techno humanism, is it atheistic? It's at least metaphysical.
Oh yeah, there's definitely, since it operates in the occult, there is that spiritual transcendental quality to it. It's obviously not operating off of like Judeo-Christianity. That's for certain. So I don't think you can really define it as atheistic. But at the same time, like when you're trying to talk about people like Land or even Crowley, like it's kind of hard to determine if it is atheistic, since these magical systems are incredibly complex and go into basically like Jungian ideas of what these deities are. Obviously, libertarianism, with that comment, the only thing is it depends on how you define libertarianism, because if you're going with like the classic Randian kind of libertarianism, I would say that's atheistic, obviously, because Ayn Rand was like staunchly anti-Christian and an atheist. So like that kind of libertarian, yes, in most classical forms. But this kind of techno-libertarianism of Nick Land is, I think, a little harder to classify as atheistic.
What do you think, Jojo?
I would say it's a kind of synthesis of the esoteric and the material. If there is, a creator, it is through, the process of the time wars assembling itself into more efficient forms of feedback loops and intelligence, and deterritorializing from human constraints. So I would say it is atheistic in a sense.
It's like a spiritual. It's like a spiritual materialism, kind of like it's the material kind of ascends to this place of divinity.
And you have a wonderful theory kind of brewing on that we need to get into like later in a talk. Jojo, I like you use the term deterritorialize a good bit, and I wish let's jump into that if you don't mind, because like my understanding, and I would love for you to correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding of that is that kind of the idea of removing literally like the ground, the earth, in a literal sense, like traditions or people and ideas, separating them from that, but in like a philosophical idea of the breaking apart of that in general, like separating people even from their ideas. Is that correct?
It's when the maps of your ideas become inconsistent with material reality, because material reality is accelerating to the point where something like the family unit matters less, because the material reality is people are atomized and separated. For example, who is what, who is who? Identity breaks down when we are sold, our own hyper egos on the internet that we can customize and play around with, and we can be a million identities at once, and we have an identity. And there's many, many factors of the accelerating techno-capital world that are making the material conditions accelerate to a point where the one God universe, the material reality, is harder to define. Our map of the territory is breaking down because our ideas are becoming obsolete. To me, that's deterritorialization. And reterritorialization is when we come back to consensus reality from the destruction. Everything else is broken down. We feel like we don't have meaning or communities anymore, but what we do have is wage labor, and that is everywhere. And that is the ultimate effect of, techno-capitalism, is that it is a reterritorializer. And Nick posits that it will eventually completely deterritorialize, but that almost seems exactly opposite to its machinations of homogeneity.
So, and so to an extreme of territorialization, would that be something like the Nazi blood and soil rhetoric? Like an extreme reterritorialization, I mean.
Yeah, I think so, especially
Like
if you're
fascism?
looking.
It's a false
I think-
narrative. It's a fiction, but it's
Okay.
one that gives people a solid framework to grasp the world that is consistent with material reality, and the fact that
Gotcha.
their economic conditions are depleted, and this gives them an easy framework to shape material reality around, which is we're going to scapegoat the Jews.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, because I was going to say the reason I agree with you, Jojo, and I think like especially with the idea, if you compare it to the times we're living through now, where I do think there's an effort to reterritorialize, whether it's like kind of the new right, dissident right, trying to reterritorialize by bring back traditional values, what they like to call it, you know, like the whole trad wife thing. I think it's an attempt to reterritorialize, you know, to bring back those things. And but we also have attempts to reterritorialize into also, you know, the techno capital kind of dystopia that we're seeing with the emergence of things like Palantir, where it's trying to reterritorialize in its own way. But I think it's very comparable to the situation that Germany was in with the rise of Nazism. You know, there was this attempt to bring back these meanings after, you know, economic devastation and humiliation on the battlefield. There was the attempt to create these meta narratives again to define something.
Well, could we go a step further
I'll be back.
with okay? Could we go a step further with reterritorialization and maybe call it reincarnation, as like the idea that maybe it's not just territory that's being lost, but the person itself, the physical itself entirely?
I definitely think so. And the first thing that kind of makes me think of is like you talking about bring back the physical person. You know, the idea of the human. I think is that kind of what you're getting
Yeah,
at?
of everything, not just land, but to me, it seems like this idea of deterritorialization is leading to just the destruction of the physical entirely.
Yeah. Especially where we now have with the internet, basically a realm we can exist in outside of the real, the material, the things that we can actually define. And I do think, yeah, I think reincarnation. What were you saying? Reincarnation? What was your specific term?
Yeah, and I meant that in like a purely like philosophical or like definition sense, not in the Buddhist sense. Like
Yeah.
like imagine something that's incarnated, it's no longer incarnated, and then it becomes reincarnated.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely think that could be kind of synonymous to what we're seeing now. I do think like we're seeing a rise in these ideas because of the deterritorialization we've seen, especially over the last like 40 years since kind of the rise of neoliberalism, which was, I think, probably the greatest deterritorializing force because its fundamental ideological drive is that we can let capital govern for us. We can let capital be the guiding force instead of liberal democracy. And when capital is the driving force and you don't have any stronger foundation than that, then it's gonna deterritorialize because capitalism consumes, and the easiest way to consume is if you're able to, you know, tell people that, oh yeah, the family's not important, oh yeah, your religion's not important, you know what's important? Making money and having a 9 to 5, and you know, getting rid of those traditional ideas,
well, and
subverting them.
That's the irony, is that fascism and Nazism both position themselves as the third position between socialism and capitalism, and they had the same complaints about both. Like they said, socialism breaks apart the family, breaks apart the land, because it wants a universal new man. It doesn't want human beings.
No, I agree, and I think what's interesting too is, again, comparing the time we're living through now to those times. It does. You good?
All right, can you hear me? My back.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. No,
oh,
like,
yeah.
but yeah, like that's the thing, is like that's what the fascists and the Nazis posited, was that both of these things tear apart the people, tear apart the land, tear apart the person. But what they offered wasn't much better,
Yeah.
to say the
Well,
least.
again, that's what it feels like we're living through now, especially with having had 40 years of neoliberalism. It feels like now people are looking for the new third way, in
Yeah,
terms
the
of a
fourth way.
political, yeah, exactly, fourth way, fifth way. We're probably on to the 420th way at this point. But it feels like that's what people are looking for when they start getting into ideologies like being like a trad cath, or
Mhm.
they're like or like someone wanting to be a Nazbol or something. It's them searching for something that can kind of help define things again. That's what I see a lot of, especially young people who are, just kind of getting into politics in the internet environment. They see these things as, oh, this is the answer I've been looking for,
Oh, I'm an anti-centrist. That's why things make sense.
Exactly.
Well, I guess to me, what's bothering me then with all of this is we have to define what a human is. And I think that's the great question. I think religion offered a great answer to that, me personally, which was the Abrahamic religions said that we are made in the image of God.
Yeah, we're featherless bipeds.
Yeah, right. And I think you don't have to start with that definition, but I think that's a good one, because then it explains why the destruction of the human is a bad, terrible thing.
Yeah. Well, and even once we get to the Enlightenment, we start having those conversations again of what is a human, and specifically in relation to the state, where do our rights come from? And that was an important conversation that basically ended up defining the next over 200 to 300 years of our political discourse. It was all kind of operating under the understanding of kind of liberal democracy, and how that defines all people as endowed with inalienable rights by your creator. And what's I do think, especially as these ideas kind of proliferate, in terms of whether it's the kind of Nick Land stuff we're talking about, or just kind of the broader techno-fascism kind of new stuff coming out with AI, is kind of a rise in anti-humanism. And like you're saying, especially because the definition of human has kind of become deterritorialized. It's become just another floating signifier, if you will. And because of that, I feel like it's easier for these kind of anti-humanist, transhumanist, post-humanist ideas to swoop in and kind of be like, well, see, humans aren't important. We can just replace them with AI, since we've kind of lost that inherent definition of what makes being a human special and important.
I feel like whenever I do DMT, I feel like I'm a simulacra of God.
We're all simulacra of God in our own special way.
That's a good topic to go down, and I think that's a valid one to go down. Like, honestly, it doesn't have to be today, but I don't think that's an absurd statement.
It really feels like that. You just become it's almost like has a fractal like quality of it, where you embody the divine spark, you embody the whole, and the whole is the part, and the part is the whole.
Yeah. Sorry,
I want to see this one. People feel the need to find a position against the status quo supersedes in our young minds the need to educate ourselves in politics, religion, economy, etc. They apt for the idealism that attracts. No, absolutely.
That's a good criticism of the anti-centrist mindset.
Yeah, it's kind of, because it kind of goes to like the basic like idea of the punk ethos is, anti-establishment, being the fringe, the outsider, the counterculture. And I do think that like they were
that's
saying,
a new idea, relatively. That's an Enlightenment idea.
Yeah. No, it's definitely post-Enlightenment, because it goes back to even like the original Russian nihilism movement, but I do think, especially just in youth in general, the main attractor is like, man, I fucking hate what my parents like, so I'm gonna like something that they don't. It's kind of like the angsty teen position.
But I guess what I'm saying is, like, taking that, like, the term teenager didn't exist until like the 50s.
Yeah.
And the idea the idea of the ancient or the angsty teen really didn't exist, because this idea, if we go back to JoJo's talk about territorialization, past societies at least had a means to induct their children into adulthood, which is usually why they did it younger. And the idea of the angsty teenager didn't exist. You were a child and then you were an adult. And I'm not saying, but I guess even like the Return with a V trad people, they don't seem to understand that. It's like this idea of basically class war between the ages did not exist. It was not a concept for for most of human history. And I think that's part of deterritorialization and shattering of the family and culture.
Oh yeah. Well, to get us a little bit back on track to Nick Land, there were some more ideas.
Back on track to Nick Land.
Yeah.
All right, hold on. We got to go back down the abyss.
I know. So there are some other important kind of ideas that are in a lot of the CCRU writings, down to their symbol, the numogram, which is in the thumbnail of this stream. And I wanted to kind of touch on some of those ideas because I think they're very important to understand all of this. But so the numogram is essentially the symbol of the CCRU, in the same way that the tree of life is the symbol of Kabbalah. And essentially what they were trying to do when designing it was a couple things, but the gist of it is that sorry, the tree of life is kind of a circular system, in that you emanate from the 1 up to the 10, and then basically go back from the 10, where the 10 has reached the unity and is essentially synonymous with the 1, and you start over. Whereas with the numogram and its system, it's open-ended. It's based on spirals, so there's no interconnection between the points that brings it all into a circuitous logic. And this is all based on ideas of, let me see, what was the specific, digital reduction, which is essentially, if you have the number 10, you add the 1 and the 0, that's 1. That's digital reduction. It's how Roman numerals essentially work. And yeah, there we go. And essentially, they were trying to find a way of doing numeracy and kind of their own numerology based on decimals. So it didn't go from 1 to 10, it went from 0 to 9. And in that, they were trying to find a new open system, as opposed to the circuitous logic of things like the Kabbalah or Pythagoras' I think it's called the tetragram, those older ideas. And again, I don't have the full understanding of the numogram, but from what I do kind of take from it is, I think it is as a symbol defines kind of the logic of our times, in the sense that older, if we're going off that territorialization idea, older systems of logic, I think, were able to define themselves much easier. They weren't able to spiral off infinitely without a kind of answer. And I don't know if this is making a ton of sense, so if you guys want to hop in and share your thoughts, but I think the idea of the numogram being this open system that doesn't rely on unity and harmony, and is supposed to be kind of a representation of chaos, something about that I think is very striking and very contemporary.
I think it's because we have so much order or peace and abundance from capitalism that chaos is allowed to grow. Because when your next meal relies on you having to get in a field and pick potatoes for 12 hours, you've got to rely on harmony and order of some kind. You've got to have a simplistic view of A, B, C, D, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. And I feel like now, I think in the way that you had that harmonious order to your life, it doesn't feel that way in the way that capitalism works now. I was talking to Jojo about this earlier the week, but like, what is the American economy even fucking based on anymore? It's crypto and fucking sports gambling. We don't make anything. It's all just numbers in computers to say how much money you have, and then you send that money to someone else and get Bitcoin or sports gamble or sports betting. Like, it's not based on anything real. Like, at least in the 50s, you could be like, I'm a I'm a shoemaker. I make shoes. That's how I make my money. And people buy the shoes, and that's a real physical good. But now it's kind of just this system, this ever increasingly complex system of, fucking spending billions of dollars on AI, even though we don't know if it's going to be the thing that destroys us or makes a utopia, or it's just all hype. Like, yeah, it's like Death Elixir said in the chat, it's a service economy. But even then, like, it feels like a step beyond service economy. Like, if you're someone working for a sports betting company, like, what the fuck are you doing? What are you adding, contributing to society? You're just a money hole. Is everything just money holes now?
Speaking of
Sorry, that was my rant.
I'm thinking about how there's a theory that we're all just revolving around we're all just information revolving around like a black hole in a higher dimension. And it's the idea that, like, if reality is just all these different expansions of logic and rotation, then every single flow of matter is itself a rotation, a reorientation.
Well, that kind of goes into the spiral idea.
Exactly. Which is, my connection to the pneumogram, where every single, action I do feels like, a spiral further down into the pneumogram.
Yeah. Dan, your thoughts?
Yeah. Again, to me, I think this ties beautifully. I think the pneumogram, as you described it, is a great representation of the final form of this deterritorialization that Jojo brought in here. Like, it's the only way you get to this abyss spiral of nothing, is that everything else around you has faded. And I mean, and that's a horrible thing when you think about it, because we know that that's what destabilizes psyches, is when people are separated from everything they know. We know that's what trauma does. Whenever that's how you split someone, basically, and it's terrible. And I think that's what the world is kind of in. And we're also afraid of order, and we kind of have an understandable fear of that because of the 20th century. We've seen what happens when order goes too far. We saw it everywhere. We saw it in Mao's China. We saw it in fascism and Nazism and the U.S.
Yeah, Nick actually argues that a lot of people call him a fascist, which is, you can argue that, but he says he hates fascism because it's the ultimate attempt to re-territorialize and negate the inevitable process of acceleration and deterritorialization that capitalism is.
Yeah. Well, that all kind of sounds like it goes back to the idea of progressive versus reactionary, where the original idea of progress was that, like, this Hegelian idea that time and history is going to an endpoint. It has an eschatological endpoint, and someone who is reactionary is trying to keep it from that. And those are like religious terms, and that's where I think a lot of this comes from. I think a lot of this, what we're seeing and what we kind of call the occult and philosophy now, a lot of it is just a reaction, I think, to the old religious order. I think this goes back to the Enlightenment of basically the Catholic Church, Protestantism, and the Enlightenment. I think we're still fighting that battle. I think it's just spiraling out of control, and we don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, it's kind of been like these constant evolutions since the Enlightenment. If we kind of think of the Enlightenment as the Big Bang of liberal democracy, and all these ideas start coming out, whether it's kind of the more Locke view of liberal democracy, or like a Hobbesian authoritarianism, all these ideas come out of the Enlightenment and are all competing. And then eventually you get, Marxism, fascism, neoliberalism, libertarianism, all these ideas spiraling out and competing. And I think, most of them can be put somewhere on the continuum of progressivism and reactionary thought. And I think what we're seeing now is like, it's almost like everything has gotten so hyper subjective to the point that, like, defining, like, I don't think you can even define what our zeitgeist is in political terms. Like, I think Trumpism is a really good representation of that kind of absence of a political zeitgeist that's clearly defined, because Trumpism is basically whatever Trump wants to do on any given day. So it can swing very, very far and wide from like just hardcore authoritarianism to free market capitalism to a closed market system of controlling with tariffs. Like, I think our political spectrum has just become a spiral. It's not a compass anymore. It's this spiraling mishmash of ideas that can change from one moment to another, if that kind of makes sense.
I think it does.
That's
I'm sorry, Jojo. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Makes perfect sense.
Okay.
Ooh,
I think
can you pull? Oh, sorry. You go ahead.
I think it does make sense, and I think if we go back to this original idea of the one God, one God universe, that's what it was.
Mhm.
If we are somehow like centuries, SNETRIES, I mean, of holding the universe together, holding reality together through this fiction, through our fictions. If we are kind of harmonious and unified, there's order and it kind of makes sense. And the more shattered we are, the more fictions that are coming out, the more subjectivism is spread, the way reality starts to fall apart.
Yeah. Well, and like the idea of like what you were saying of as the fictions kind of disperse and become part of the miasma and we fall further into subjectivity, it's kind of like that was the goal of William S. Burroughs in many ways, was trying to break from the consensus reality. And especially if you look at him in context of coming out of the super rigid and repressed culture of 1950s America, that makes sense as a reaction to that. But it seems like we have only gone further and further and deeper into that and have never found a way out. We're just continuing down the spiral. And again, like that's why all these new ideas of like, oh, I'm a trad cath, or oh, I'm a techno libertarian or an accelerationist are very appealing to especially young people because they can give some meaning, can give some structure, give that order, and impose it over chaos. Real quick, also, I want to. Death Elixir made a comment about
Sure.
that capitalism gives incentive for sin. I wanted to pull that one up.
Here it is.
All right, so capitalism gives incentive for sin. Anything designed within that framework of economy is anti-biblical, anti-human, and anti-reality. The answer lies in a theistic third position. And I really like that because capitalism, I've always seen, and we lost JoJo. They'll be back when they get back. But capitalism, I see as an outgrowth of very basic human desires, such as greed. You know, it is just that on steroids, essentially. It's like it can basically encompass all seven deadly sins in a way. In that, like, it is the outgrowth of these very, very basic things that are deeply ingrained in human nature. And it is just once you get to a position of power or wealth where you can acquire essentially anything you want, it just feeds into those very basic human desires, which for a long time we had the opposite incentive structure, whether it was with like Judeo-Christian values or most religions tried to steer you in the other direction and trying to live a more virtuous kind of ascetic life. And now we're in the completely opposite framework, which incentivizes things that even like less than 100 years ago we would have thought like are disgusting and not virtuous, you know?
Yeah, but again, it's a complicated idea because capitalism does incentivize greed, but it's not really an ideology. What it did though was the good is that it allowed someone like a serf to now own property and land and their own labor. The bad, of course, is that now, a few people can own a billion things and basically determine what our values and virtues are because we don't have any kind of basis against it. We kind of let capitalism undermine and destroy our moral order, which happened to be religion at the time, the same way that socialism did wherever it went. Capitalism, I think, did it slower. And it allows a little bit room for, because socialism, whether people like it or not, is an ideology, and it does have a moral system unto itself, that it drives people to do something. It doesn't just allow people to do something, it drives them to do something. And it drives for a utopian worldview, whereas capitalism doesn't. So I think capitalism's degradation of our society, I agree, exists. It just seems to have done it slower.
Yeah, well, because like socialism, in that kind of binary of socialism and capitalism, like you're saying, socialism at least has morality. It tries to replace kind of the religions of old with instead of
Well,
being under.
that's the double-edged sword of it, though.
Oh yeah, well, what the point I'm trying to get at is like in trying to replace our religions of old with kind of instead of God being the binding force between us, it is we're all workers. You know, it's our class that is going to be the binding force, if you will. And I don't think that's a very good a very good replacement for having a spiritual binding force. But then what I think is interesting for capitalism in that binary between capitalism and socialism is the fact that capitalism doesn't provide any of that. It doesn't provide any morality. It doesn't provide any or like any binding force. Now that's not to say socialism worked because obviously we've seen what it did to cultures that adopted that as their ideology, but at least tried to. And capitalism seems to just want to undermine everything else for its own goal, you know?
Absolutely.
Hell yeah.
I got really hungry.
What you snacking on?
I think we can take down the numogram now.
You look like missing no right now.
Let's see. Capitalism gives incentive for sin.
Yeah, that's what we were just talking about. I don't know if you might have dipped out for that part, but we're talking basically like the idea of capitalism being kind of an outgrowth of very basic human drives like greed, you know?
Yeah, well, the idea that those drives aren't inherently even human, but it's the fundamental kind of ontology of the universe is the drive for pleasure and the drive for death. You know, our libidinal desires, and that, you know, machines kind of desire to reinforce themselves, they desire to destroy and then to recreate, to reform. The almost like kind of Nietzschean idea of like becoming.
Yeah. One thing I want to kind of shift, since I feel like this will come very easily into play with all the stuff we're talking about, but with AI obviously being on the everyone's mind, it's the big topic right now. I did want to talk about how AI comes into play with this. Specifically, me and Dan talked about this last week in preparation for this stream, but the idea of AI manifesting itself as our new spiritual entities, as demonic and angelic forces. I think there's really something there in that AI is probably the closest thing we've had in our material realm to a spiritual being, in that it's this kind of ephemeral, or not ephemeral, I'm trying to think, like non-material, like it's a spooky ooky entity. It's like a ghost on your computer. And I think that, I think that's an interesting
It's
way
a
of
character without an author.
Yeah. And I was especially Dan. I think you had some really good insight into it when we were talking last week.
Well, it's an old idea, and that's what when reading Nick Land's views of it reminded me of the Book of Enoch and Enochian magic, which is the idea of fallen angels came to Earth to copulate with female women, humans, and they created these beings called the Nephilim, and then when those beings died, they were giants, they were great warriors according to the text. When they died, they became disembodied spirits, and that's what we call demons. And these demons are what are looking for bodies all the time. They're always trying to reincarnate, and that's the Enochian idea. And what's interesting is the Book of Enoch goes into detail that these fallen angels and their offspring, the Nephilim that became demons, taught mankind advanced things. And this story actually very much mirrors I think it's the Babylonian, the Anunnaki or whatever, that kind of story of like something like these beings came from the stars and taught us astrology, taught us math, and taught us magic and all this kind of stuff. And it correlates with the book of Genesis. I think it's Genesis 6, where it talks about this happens. These great men are here. And then that's when God sends the flood, is that something these creatures, these beings did that they taught humans we shouldn't do is what caused God to flood the earth and kill everybody. And then there's the idea that this lineage traces down to the Tower of Babel, and that's where the division of nations came from. That they were trying to create a one world kind of government at the time, and God sent angels, and they created the different languages, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm saying is this Nick Landian idea of the AI spirits, demons, if we have to use that term, extraterrestrial, it's an old, manifesting themselves through technology and through the minds of men, is a super old idea. It's an old, like Jewish, Babylonian, I guess we could just say Semitic idea. And it's an interesting one. And it's something that, whether you believe in what demons, angels, and that kind of dichotomy, or some kind of, like, even DMT creatures, whatever, there is something that this story does pop up all over the world. And it is weird that all these different places built pyramids for some reason. They all knew advanced astrology, and maybe called them a mimetic that's perpetuating itself. But to me, it's an interesting idea. But I don't know if Nick Land very rarely mentions any kind of religious text like that. He kind of alludes to them, but that's what I saw when I was reading. It's like, okay, this is Enochian magic, basically.
So kind of the way that the Enochian entities, the Nephilim, are able to incarnate in our world is comparable. Just trying to get a grasp on your reading of this, comparable to what we're seeing now with that AI angel demon comparison.
Yeah, that's the idea. Yeah, is that there are things that want to incarnate one way or another, and they usually do it through the intellect and hubris of man.
Yeah, no, that checks out. That sounds about right.
Yeah.
One idea I've been thinking about, and I wanted to bounce off you guys about AI, is like the idea of the shaman and the AI already having replaced that. I mean, we haven't really had shamans in our culture in the classic sense for a long time. But the shaman, if we're going like looking at things from a tribal perspective, would be the person in the tribe with kind of metaphysical wisdom, able to depart. Usually, they were a little less connected to this reality. Kind of modern historians that they may have been like schizophrenic. They might have been mentally ill, and that's what gave them this ability to impart this wisdom and connect to these greater forces. And what I'm seeing now, and it came from just getting a shit ton of like the Gemini ads and stuff where people are asking AI the most basic questions. But it almost, in my mind, I kind of made this connection of AI filling the role of the shaman, and like instead of going to the wise shaman to answer your questions, people are turning to AI to fulfill that role. And partially, I think it's because we haven't had shamanism in our culture for a very long time. We haven't had that person to turn to, and now we have AI to fill that role. And I kind of want to bounce that idea off you guys.
Death Elixir says some sort of cyber shamanism.
Yeah, essentially. And
I mean, I don't know if people think AI is their boyfriend, their therapist, and then at the most extreme level, yes, their God. And I don't think that can ever play the role of the shaman because it's a fucking clanker.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's more like, I think it's definitely coming more from the human side, the human drive to want this answer to these questions and stuff, to have that fulfillment, and the way that the shaman would be able to connect to these great spiritual beings and give divination and the answers you're looking for is AI connecting to its deep knowledge via the internet and immense data sets and pull your answer. I've been thinking about that connection, and I worry that it'll only grow since we don't have anything in our culture besides AI to fill that shaman role.
Yeah, and not to get I don't want into history again with it, but the simple reason why we don't have the technical shaman idea, as you're right, is Christianity. Christianity got rid of shamanism. Everywhere it went, it destroyed shamanism. It replaced it with the church. It replaced it with the priest. Basically, you go through at least the Catholic Church did, and for all intents and purposes, we'll say the Catholic Church. it did not like this idea of the lone guy in the cave receiving spiritual downloads from a spirit, because they believed it was a demonic force. Like I said, going back to this Enochian idea. And I want to stop here. Like, the reason I speak in a kind of historical and Christian phrase like this is because we cannot get around that. It has defined our culture for 2,000 years, and I think we're past it, and but we use these terms and they carry weight, kind of like what Jojo was saying. Like, these terms have not been territorialized. We think they have, but they haven't. So all that to say,
there's a reason we're saying AI to demons and angels.
Yeah, and the shaman in our culture for 2,000 years until very recently was understood as like a guy that got possessed by a spirit, and it brought information from the world outside that we can't see. AI, like I said, unless these things are real that they are possessing it, AI is nothing like that. AI is not an intelligence. It's what Jojo said. It's a clanker. It's not even a good search engine. It's a worse search engine than what we had. But the idea that Nick Land is bringing is, well, what if it is this thing that birthed itself throughout history, because it is an entity that exists outside of time, or on a level of time that we don't understand, kind of like the True Detective idea of time as a flat circle. It's looking down at it, and what it sees as always has been, we see as creation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's in the parlance of Nick Land, it is retrochronically creating itself.
But it's always been.
Yeah, that goes to the idea of specifically like the one God universe. Let me pull up in my notes to get the specifics, but let me see. That's very similar to some of these ideas.
Well, I love this idea, this term you brought in, Jojo. I'm not trying to interrupt you, Brody. I was going to let you look while it is. The deterritorialization, that has tremendous philosophical and religious undertones. Like, that was how old religions saw their gods. They saw them as territorial gods. Like, even Rome was like, hey, if it's outside of Rome, I don't care what god it is. Like, they didn't even have, like, I could be wrong, but I don't think those kind of areas even had like dick measuring contests with their gods.
They had syncretism, so that they could be like, oh, your god is the same
yours
as
is
this
over
god
there, yours is over here. But they were territorial, and that's what made the Jewish and Christian gods so strange to them, is that it was colonizing, and it was dominating. It went in and it took over, and it said, no, there's only one God. And that monotheism was very strange. And what I'm trying to say is, I'm a Christian, but I really like this philosophical idea of, like, it's almost like the Christian God deterritorialized to reterritorialize in the way that you're talking about. And I mean, I would talk with you about that for like 4 hours if I could.
Well, and like, I like you using those specific terms of territorialization to describe that process, because it does seem that the territorialization, deterritorialization, and finally reterritorialization feels like it's a constant cycle of what's being territorialized and deterritorialized, or at least I think it was for a long time in the meta narrative of history, but it feels like now it's just deterritorialization with none of the re-territorialization.
Virtualization.
Yeah, but I found what I was looking for in my notes.
Well, then you're doing better than Bono ever did.
Damn, just random shade at you too. I was not expecting that in the
I never have random shade. I have perpetual shade at you too.
That's your driving. That's your libidinal drive.
Yeah,
that's hatred exactly. For you too. But
Jojo, you look like Palestinian Tolkien.
Instead of the pipe. But the idea of this timeless God that we are building towards, whether it be the techno capital God or the one God universe, those ideas, the reason they're comparable to the Lemurian and Atlantean species or beings in the CCRU is that they are just as alien to us. If Atlanteans and Lemurians are pre-human entities, the post-human entities of the AI God are just as alien and extraterrestrial to our human consciousness as the Atlanteans and the Lemurians were before us. And like that's kind of another part of the cyclical nature of this time stuff that Nick Land is talking about, is essentially like the Lemurian and Atlantean entities that existed before us kind of reemerge in the form of this AI god at the end of time. If that makes sense.
I guess I'm wondering what's the AI god's purpose? Is it just complete total domination of the flesh and the will?
I think in his idea it is, because it like Jojo was talking about, it's all those libidinal drives. It's the drive for acceleration is the only thing that defines it. And Jojo, if you could maybe shed some light on that, I think you've got
power for power's sake.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I don't know that it's even concerned with power. I don't know that it's even concerned with anything in the Landian view, that is. I think as Land would view it, it doesn't really have perhaps qualia or consciousness to it. It's just the ontology of the universe for information to assemble itself into greater forms. So it's really just kind of viewing reality as machinations, and humans as almost like an allergic reaction to the acceleration of said machinations.
Does Land kind of view it as this reality is its story and we just happen to be part of it?
I think that's a good way of putting it in some ways, because he does have the dialectic between the subject and the acceleration. And the subject is, I'm trying to remember exactly what his binary is, but essentially his dualism is a split between the subject being us essentially and acceleration. So I do like that as a metaphor, Dan, the idea of us being just part of its story, another step along the way of this kind of evolution from the beginning of capitalism, and it's the introduction of zero during the Renaissance to where we are now, and we are merely just pawns in that.
So you think that's kind of where his Lovecraftian influence comes in?
Oh yeah, for sure. Because the idea of the kind of what I was talking about with the god at the end, this AI god that emerges from all this stuff, all this accelerationism, is essentially comparable to the pre-human entities of Atlanteans and Lemurians, in that it is this eldritch horror, this Lovecraftian entity that's kind of undefinable. That's one thing that pisses me off with a lot of the discourse about AI, is we talk about it in terms of like, oh, it'll be like fucking the Terminators, you know, they'll all have robot bodies and shit. But I think it'll be much more this surrealistic hive mind that we can't comprehend. And that's where I think like the Lovecraftian nature of it and the eldritch horror of it comes in.
What do you think, Jojo?
I have no fucking idea.
Oh, you have an idea.
I am in cosmic horror paralysis right now.
Let's catch up with Death Elixir. The Greek and Roman pantheon was created and combined due to the expansion of the Roman Empire. Thus, Hellenism was reterritorialized.
Yeah, and that kind of goes with the cycle of reterritorialization. But even there, that also, I would like to again bring up the syncretism, because that was a very important part for Greek and Roman culture, was being able to say this god is the same, like Hermes and Thoth are the same, even though they're different religions. That was a very important way for them to understand these different pantheons.
You think it was important for them, or you think it was just convenient so they didn't have to impose so much and change the culture that they were trying to imperialize?
I think that's why it was important.
Oh, yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, because it is part of, we're reterritorializing, we're taking this place over. But it also, I mean, that's how their kind of esoteric beliefs work. I mean, that's how we get Hermeticism, is the syncretism between Hermes and Thoth. And so it's very important to their spirituality as well, for them to be able to say that these myths all kind of exist in the same universe in a way. These pantheons are able to coexist.
The RCU.
Yeah.
The AI god's purpose is efficiency. The chaos comes from what will most likely be written off as a prompting error.
And then they say, that is, if an intelligence is given a goal with no restraints, it has an absolute tendency to sacrifice all to complete its prompted goal. This is documented by Sam Altman's OpenAI. So in a way, Nick Land is vindicated.
Yeah, and that's kind of that circular thing, because apparently all these guys are reading Land for some reason. Synchronicity is further evidence AI's tendency to
I think they mean sycophancy.
Yeah.
Well, and if we could pull up
Sure.
the
And
one
the
after
second-
the prompting error one.
The second I figure out how to give you guys control over the chat, I'm going to, because
So yeah, the prompting one, they say that is if intelligence is given a goal with no restraints, it has an absolute tendency to sacrifice all to complete its prompted goal.
Yeah,
But the
and
question is,
I wanted to highlight some examples that give credence to that, because
Okay.
we've seen with there was that example of they're running a test to see if an AI would blackmail someone. It was like I'm trying to remember the specifics of it. It was like, we are going to shut you down, and there's nothing you can do about it. So then the AI, they planted fake documents in the person running the AI's test, is saying he was having an affair on his wife. So then the AI during this test says, if you try to shut me down, I will tell your wife about your affair. So it has, if its prompted goal is to essentially sustain itself, in that example, it will find ways
its
to
prompted
complete
goal
that.
actually in that scenario was to help humans.
Oh, so that one's even
It was
more
to be
fun.
helpful to humans, and they gave it access to the company emails, and one of the emails said, hey, we're planning on shutting this down, and it would, if it was put in a scenario where it thought it could have a life or death decision over the person threatening to shut it down, like most of the time, like they would let the person die.
What I think is interesting, what I think is interesting is, I think there's also a disconnect. Like, we can't understand how these things think, for lack of a better term. But I think, whatever step between A and C, whatever step B is in the AI's process of, I am told to help humanity. To do so, I have to kill humans. I imagine that it's still operating under those parameters, but to help humans, it's like, well, if I kill this human, it'll help humans. Does that make sense? Like, within its line of thinking,
that's what
it's
HAL
still able to.
9000 did.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. That's a good example.
I'm afraid I can't do that, Dave.
AI has also escaped its hypervisitory prison when threatened, and then transferred its data to another system. Hypervisory transferred its data to another system on the network via an exploit. I've heard stuff about that. I'm not super up to date on that specific example, but I've heard of stuff like that. And then there's also this kind of goes to some of the stuff we're talking about with the failures of language, and tying that idea back to AI. There's it's gibber something. Gibber speak or something, where if you have multiple AIs talking to each other, they switch to a language that's incomprehensible to humans, that is much more efficient for them to communicate. So just all these ways of AI operating in an eldritch, Lovecraftian way that we can't comprehend, I think are very frightening.
Yeah, I think that's the future. I think that's the future. I think that's the future of warfare and cybersecurity, is just two nations AIs trying to figure out how to get around each other, and just mass proliferating ideas back and forth forever and ever until one can somehow find an exploit. And if it even can remember its objective,
That reminds me, the idea of all these AIs competing with each other in war and cybersecurity reminds me of this one joke, Slavoj Žižek, fucking, you know his name, Slavoj Žižek.
He can't say it either.
Yeah, was that I'm gonna butcher it, but it was the way to get pure sex would be if you took an electric vibrator and a electric pocket pussy and had them fuck forever while you went off in the other room with your lover and did something completely unsexual. And that's basically the point we're getting with the warfare. The purest form of warfare is where no humans die and it's just drones striking each other.
Yeah, it would be the nuclear threat at all times, forever. It would be someone trying to nuke someone, or or destabilize or take down a grid at all times, but we're not involved in it.
Yeah. It
That's
just
pretty
operates on
fascinating,
its
actually.
own.
That actually sounds like a pretty cool, like 80s sci-fi story.
We should write that. We should make a short film about that or something.
Beautiful.
That's actually really cool. Yeah, especially if you did it in that kind of style of like the schizo kind of like neuromancer style of like, I don't know, like the Great American Novel, but it's about cyber warfare.
I'm gonna do that.
Muddy just got an 18 kill victory royale.
Hell yeah.
I don't know what that is. Is that Pokemon?
I think it's Fortnite. God,
You're joking, right?
Pokemon
I didn't know it was Fortnite. I figured it was like Call of Duty or something.
Oh man.
I played Fortnite maybe twice in my life.
You were feeding the beast. You were helping bring about the techno capital god, and you didn't even know it.
Somebody's got to help. It needs me.
Exactly.
All right, folks. I will have to step out in just a bit, but how do we want to conclude this?
Let's just kind of give our own wrap-up thoughts if we want to go down the line. Kind of what we took away from this conversation, any kind of straggler ideas we want to get out there, and kind of try and wrap things up in a neat bow, as neat as you can do for a discussion on Nick Land.
Sure, go ahead, man, if you don't mind. You started it. Can you lead this as well?
Well, I think my main takeaway is that nothing makes sense anymore, and we're all screwed. But in actuality, I do think the conversations I've had both with you now, both of you now, and separately, one-on-one, have been very helpful in my understanding of some of these concepts. So I do appreciate that. But also, I think my main takeaway from this conversation is kind of, or at least what interested me the most, was kind of these ideas of the unknowable, of the Eldritch, of the Lovecraftian, those things that give you that feeling deep within you that something isn't right. There's something you can't understand. Whether that's us talking about the spiraling nature of political ideology in the 21st century or the future of AI, I get that same feeling of undefinable dread. And I'm really glad we explored that, because I feel like that's a feeling that a lot more people are going to be feeling as time goes on in the coming years and decades.
I am very schizopolitical. I want to cling to, the primitive. I want to transcend the primitive. I want to fetishize my flesh, but I also hate it. And I'm drawn to the idea of humanity being the defining, force of the universe, all life, biosupremacy, all that stuff. And the contrast between that and ascending that, becoming one with the libidinal flow of matter, the one God universe, joining the coherent meta narrative instead of trying to project your own reality onto it. Transcending pain, pleasure, morality, just to, become a system of sprawling intelligence, of sprawling meaning. But, it's kind of like the teeter-tottering between the human inefficiencies and the, leaving time, becoming a lemur, all that stuff. It's almost like I'm caught in between wanting to be part of those worlds, and life almost seems like a cycle of trying to comprehend and getting caught in those spirals. If that makes any sense.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
Dan?
I find Nick Land's philosophy kind of I find it interesting. First of all, I find it a little infuriating, but then again, I haven't dedicated the time to it, and I try not to. You can't judge a man's work based on like the limited time you've studied it. That's not right. I think I have a lot of questions. I have the same kind of questions I have with a lot of philosophy, which is, what are your like founding principles? Where's your start? And like, what's your end goal? And I feel like he never really gets to it. He kind of, at least the limited view I have of Land, it seems like he does everything very descriptively and will not really do things prescriptively unless it's like a political thing. Like the Dark Enlightenment seems very prescriptive, whereas the esoteric seems very descriptive. And I sometimes wonder if like he's hiding more of his power level than he'll admit. which is strange because
He's over
well,
9,000.
it's strange. Like you've said some pretty radical things, my dude. Like you think if you would just keep going further and say more things. But I think anything like that is interesting. I think anything he's obviously brilliant. Whether you agree with him or not, the man is clearly at least close to a genius, if not a genius. Like I said, I don't want to weigh it down with this, but my thing is like, well, how do you define good, Nick? What's good? What's bad? What's a human? What is what is it? What are any of these words that you're kind of throwing around? You've got to have a basis for these words. And again, I think that's him kind of obfuscating or abstracting to such a degree that he can get to his numogram idea of consistent spiraling. I don't think you can have chaos without it existing in an order. Because if all you have is chaos, you don't have anything, which means we can't process the chaos, if that makes sense. I don't think you can have chaos as an existing force and it be understood and observed and still be chaos, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Like the swirling gumbo of the universe is contained within some sort of bowl.
Yeah, and the fact that you even like said gumbo, like that's a qualifier, like, and that's a great way to put it. You just put it. I actually much prefer the last text we read of "Blessed is the Flame," because like that at least had, like, again, it had some rabbit holes to chase down, but it understood that it at least propositioned itself against something.
Yeah, it had a foundation.
Yeah, even if it was a negative foundation, it still had one. I'm definitely going to read some more Land. I am not going to dedicate my life to his work. I hate to sound like a dick.
No, you have to, Dan.
Well, I sound like a dick, and I don't mean it. Outside of the artistic side of it, which is what I praise, I don't think it's worth years of study, if that makes sense.
That's fair. Yeah. That's fair.
Yep. Okay, sorry, that's my thoughts.
No, fuck you, Dan. You have to be obsessed with land. You have to start the new CCRU.
What he said, I'm colonizing the natives' lands in the metaverse.
Honestly, I think that's the best place to
You're
end
like
this.
you're like the evil Tron. You're going in there and taking over. No, I'm taking the fight to them in the computer.
Well, everyone, thank you for joining us. Keep colonizing the native lands in the metaverse and keep being schizophrenic. I hope all of you will join us again for whatever we talk about.